Blatner. I'm the president of Creative Pro Network, and Jeff asked me to, thank you so much, asked me to say a few words about stuff. I think that's the technical term. And there are rules. I do have a few prepared words here to say. And there are rules about giving talks at this kind of conference. For example, one of the most important rules is don't discuss religion or politics. Well, I'm going to talk about both today. In fact, I'm going to tell you about my religion and my political philosophy. And no, I'm not talking about Judaism or liberalism or Buddhism. I'm talking about something called packetism. And you probably haven't heard about packetism before because I just made it up. But I encourage you, it's worthy of consideration. Okay, so I encourage you to hear me out. Now, what is packetism? Consider the neuron. The neuron is a particular kind of organic cell that evolved to do a job that consists of 3 tasks. Collect information, filter it, and then when it feels that something is important, then share it with other neurons. That's what neurons do. They collect, they filter, or you might call it process or synthesize, but I like to call it filter, and then they pass some of it along. So, but what is it that they're handing off to other neurons? It could be made of various things, but I like to collectively call this a packet. They hand off a packet of information. And when an organism develops to contain a few hundred neurons, it can start doing stuff, recognizing conditions in its environment, and then responding. You get to about 5,000 or 10,000 neurons, and then you really get to be able to do stuff. You get to move. And of course, as brain systems become more complex, these creatures can process more complex signals. And they behave in more complex ways because there are more neurons collecting, filtering, and then sharing them across the synapses, the spaces between them. Because remember that neurons don't actually touch, right? There's always a space between them. And one neuron can pass along important information to dozens or even thousands of other neurons. Actually, crazy little side note. Did you know that neurons can also pass information back to themselves? They can actually, the neurons can go back to themselves in something called an autopsy. So they're actually talking to themselves, trying to figure all this out. It's fascinating. Anyway, funny thing happens as you start bringing more and more neurons together, all right? You get increasingly complex systems. They organize themselves into subsystems, some for visual recognition, some for smelling things, which of course is just really an environmental chemical recognition system, some for muscle movement, and so on. We have some very complex systems here. Of course, the requisite kitten image, which must be in all presentations. And then these neurons all work together to keep the larger organism alive, right? That's what they're doing. They work, each individual neuron collecting, processing, sharing for a higher purpose. This is key, the survival and development of something bigger. Now, of course, once you blow past millions or billions of neurons, and you hit, say, tens of billions of neurons, then something starts to happen. You start hitting these subgroups. And the subgroups start to share not just within each subgroup, but also from one group to another. So, for example, the neurons within the cerebellum, the lower part of the brain in the back, they control breathing, making sure we stay upright while we're walking, stuff like that. And these neurons, they're kind of introverts, kind of antisocial. They mostly just communicate with each other and with various parts of the body, right? But then higher up, in the cerebrum, the forebrain, we find something crazy happening. These neurons up here are not just talking within their own local groups, the visual system, the language system, and so on. They're actually sharing packets of information across groups. And researchers have shown that when you start sharing enough packets across groups, you get something astonishing. Consciousness. Now, in fact, some scientists actually believe that they can literally measure the level of consciousness, called phi, based on how much information is being shared across the system. And we know that when there are too few packets, or when certain communication lines get broken, consciousness stops. Each subgroup will still work independently. The brain and the body can keep working, but without efficient and precise packet sharing across the whole of the brain, we lose consciousness, the most precious thing that we have. Okay, now here's the crazy part. In the spirit of as above, so below, I believe that each one of us reflects our own neural network, and that we too are hardwired to collect, process, and share. That's what we do. Everything I'm saying today has been collected, filtered, evaluated, repackaged, and now I'm using an extraordinarily complex combination of electrochemical and physiological mechanisms to share this packet of information with you. Why? Because that's what we do. We share packets. We share packets with our subgroups, the people who think like we do, and we share packets with other groups and across a far larger system that is bigger and more complicated than any of us. And here's where I think religion and politics come into play, because, religion and politics are both based on the idea that we are each part of something bigger and that we can make a difference in that system. But here's the thing. Simple packets require simple encoding. Complex packets of information require complex encoding. And we humans evolved to encode and transmit information to each other using a variety of complex methods, including something called language. But at a certain point, spoken language just wasn't enough anymore, and we started making art. And this idea that we could encode ideas, stories, packets in a persistent system spun off into pictograms and then alphabets, symbol systems that enable efficient packet transfer. I love the way the poet and typographer Robert Bringhurst said, writing is the solid form of language, the precipitate. Symbol systems are a way to take an ephemeral fog of ideas and distill it and make it manifest. And because these symbols were persistent forms, there was a brilliant side effect. The encoded information became storage systems, right? Literally our collective memory. Somewhere along the line, we found that we could pool these encodings into something called a bio-optical organizational knowledge base, which of course is better known by its initials. And this changed everything. This changed everything because once you can store packets of information in more or less random access memory, and you can share collections or libraries of memories across a larger number of neurons, humans, people, then you can build feedback loops that lead to ever more complex systems that not only work together to maintain the larger enterprise, but keeping the larger system alive, but also let it thrive and evolve. I love this cartoon. Now, I need to be clear here. We learned early on that data encoded in a book or a document, the words were not enough to carry or transmit the full package. There were subtleties that could make or break the transmission, subtleties that it takes time and effort to master. So, for example, it starts with the simplest symbol forms. Now, symbols evolved in ways that seem to work, but symbols are really tricky. Even a small change can cause havoc, meaning the differences between recognition and confusion. This is obviously wrong, right? But why? It has all the strokes in more or less correctly. And my son right now is currently taking Japanese, And a big part of it, he's in high school, and a big part of this is developing his symbol recognition in a way that I find amazing. Like this character. Is this correct? Anyone? No, this is gibberish. This doesn't mean anything. But this, let's see if let's search it. This one, well, this one means shiawase, or happiness. Why? Because a subtle yet precise change makes all the difference. Packet transmission is all about incredibly subtle yet precise differences. As the social scientist Gregory Bateson once said, information is a difference that makes a difference. So you can see that little changes in position or form can translate to significant differences in meaning. And it's not just within each symbol. The larger context or even adjustments to the form are critical, right? So changing the word, changing the color of a word, it's really bad. Changing the color of a word changes our ability to process its meaning, right? And changing the style or characteristics of a word, what we would call the font, changes its voice. Because if you think about it, different fonts actually feel or sound like different human voices or intonations. The styling is like metadata that helps us better convey meaning. Now, of course, I'm just scratching the surface here, right, with text styling. There is so much more. Position on the page, and the size, the quality of the prose, the styling of the artwork. And so begins the role of the designer. Now, a designer is someone who is either naturally sensitive to or has been trained to become sensitive to subtle distinctions in symbols, the semiotics of imagery, the understanding that how you say something, how you convey it, how you transmit a packet of information is often as important or even more important than the data itself. Okay? So in the 1990s, early 1990s, I was producing pages for a print book, and the pages looked good to me, but I showed the designer, and she quickly pulled out a loop and a ruler, and she pointed out that the captions under each photograph were inconsistent. The distance from the baseline of the text to the image above it varied in position by as much as 2 points. 2 points in the common tongue of designers and printers is about 0.023 inches or 0.7 millimeters. And she was not happy. Oh man, she was not happy. And I learned that day that designers are different. Designers are not happy with good enough. Designers see the world differently. Now, I think I can safely say here that no designer was involved with the setting of the text on the right. You can actually find this on the building that holds the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. And I particularly like the phrase, I don't know if you can see that, probably not very well there. There's a little phrase written by Thomas Jefferson in the highlighted part where he discusses execrable commerce and an assemblage of horrors. And for a designer, those words seem to sum this up pretty well. Now, there is, of course, a whole language that describes the tools and the nuances that designers use. For example, the word to change the amount of space between two characters in a word is called kerning, right? And designers even have a great word to describe those execrable mishandlings of design, which is it's a great self-referential, ironic word, formed by itself, poorly kerning the space between the R and the N, so it becomes kemming. And kemming is a very clear statement that some people get it and some people don't. Designers are often hypersensitive to nuances that many of us aren't. You know, it's in the same way that a professional violinist may notice the slightest fluctuation in pitch that the rest of us wouldn't. Or a photographer can see when a color print needs 1% more magenta. As astonishing as this degree of sensitivity can seem, almost anyone can learn how to do this. Did you know that researchers have shown that humans can learn to smell almost as well as dogs? You know that? It's incredible. And here's the trick. Smelling molecules are heavier than air. So you've got to get your nose to the ground to smell them. Amazing. Now, most of us just don't care enough to crawl around with our noses to the ground. Just like most people don't care to learn the difference between kerning and chemming. But they do notice the difference. It does go in. They may not be aware of it, but they can feel it. And once you start to notice, like when you become sensitive to visual design, then all kinds of things start to pop out at you. Like when I first saw this sign, I was confused. Is this a pro-Pope support group? Or is it a fried chicken shop? I don't know, okay? And their brand is so inconsistent that it makes me feel that they don't care about quality. The message, the packet of information that this company is trying to convey to me is failing because of poor design choices. So design, at its heart, is about carefully controlling the many different factors that go into conveying a message successfully, relaying a packet from one-to-one or one-to-many. And it's not just about marketing and sales, of course. One of the most practical public applications of design is that of building documents or books. And yes, I know I shouldn't, but I often use documents and books interchangeably. I mean, after all, as I said earlier, they're both ways to organize and store packets of information, like bubbles of memories or feelings, ideas, data. And I've been writing books for about 30 years, and I've been reading them for even longer. So I do have to admit a slight bias toward a definition of book that includes grease being smushed onto pulped trees, preferably with a pretty cover. But of course, that just tells part of the story these days, because if you draw a line from where we were in design and publishing 3 decades ago to 1 decade ago to today, the conclusion is obvious. Our old definition of a book or document needs to change radically. And like so many other readers or content creators, for me, a book no longer implies print and now often includes digital on-screen experiences, often with video and audio and animation, interactivity, and more. So today, I define a document as no less than a compact, transferable experience. It's compact because a document or publication or book must be distilled from a larger source and bundled or bound in a finite package. It has a shape, it has an edge. It must also be transferable, meaning it can be exchanged, downloaded, stored in its entirety. Now, this idea of being transferable also points to a document's implicit purpose. Again, to transfer ideas, the packets, from one person to another. Of course, we don't usually talk about packet transfer when we talk about documents and books, right? We have other more nuanced words like educate, or argue, or promote, or my favorite, express. Express is wonderful because it just means so many things. It means to articulate, of course, but I love the definition that it's a method or means of swift transmission, like an express train or an express command. And of course, to express something means to squeeze it out. So in books and all kinds of publications, we use energy to express our ideas as efficiently as possible using words, pictures, perhaps interactivity, and of course, design. The precise positioning, formatting, timing, even behavior of the elements within this transferable experience. Now, we use documents to express, but we also use them to organize and to store. So I was moved at an early age by learning about Alan Kay's idea that computers are a form of brain augmentation. I love that idea, brain augmentation. That is, today's tools don't just extend our muscles or our physical abilities, but also offload or expand our mental abilities. So the more we build intelligence into the tools, the more we share that expertise, that perspective, those memories, and then even can recall them repeatedly, even after the original expert, the creator, is gone. Now, some of you are saying, What about the internet? I can just learn everything I need there. And it's virtually without limit. And it's certainly not compact. And I do admit that I too, on occasion, have used the internet. More importantly, I admit that digital books and documents may have connections to that outside world. That is, even within its compact, transferable experience, an electronic document might exchange data with the internet or even with other documents, or rely on a sensor from whatever media it's on. But a document, a book, even a digital one, must still stand alone, largely functional and useful even when entirely offline. That's key. Now, of course, there are documents, and then there are documents. I break the world of design and publishing into two groups. First, there's the kind of files produced by people who use Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, which I call good enough publishing. You know that phrase, good enough for government work? Did you know that during World War II, that actually meant held to the highest standards? It was good enough for government work. I guess those standards slipped a little bit because today it just means simply adequate. You know, it's good enough. Good enough, it's tolerable. Good enough to get the job done without any additional effort. Now, I do want to emphasize that in many cases, there is nothing wrong with good enough publishing. I mean, I'm not really trying to imply a value judgment here. 30 or 40 years ago, good enough publishing was what you would do with a Selectric, right? Instead, a Selectric typewriter, instead of actually going out and hiring a typesetting firm to do it. Good enough publishing with Word or HTML. Today, the vast majority of what is published does fall into this category. With Word or HTML or web publishing is all basically good enough. The EPUB and the Kindle file formats, which, as you know, are more or less HTML, are good enough. And good enough publishing with Word or HTML not only looks pretty good, but it works well. It helps me efficiently communicate my ideas. Now, the second form of design and publishing is precision placement publishing. This is the realm of Adobe InDesign or Illustrator or Quark Express or other tools that allow creative professionals to create an exact visual experience. Now, often this kind of design is printed or it's exported as a PDF document so that it appears, again, more or less exactly as the designer intended. Now, this page needs to look like this, with a timeline just so, and the colors and the fonts and so on. I am sure that somebody could find a way to turn this into a reflowable EPUB, but it wouldn't be the same, would it? It's critical that the design be right. Designers of children's books know this too well. So often, the simpler the document, the more important it is to get it just right. Sacred books, like this page from the Babylonian Talmud, often require precision publishing. You know, the phrase, when you absolutely, positively need to get it right. So maps, packaging, art books. This is truly the world of precision publishing, where good enough will never fly. This map, by the way, is, I should have to point this out, this is horrible. This is something that Monty Python would do, and it's designed to offend virtually everybody. But it is a great example of how you can take a huge amount of data, in this case stereotypes that people have, and carefully, painstakingly craft a document. This is a spread from a book that I wrote about physical spectrums, here talking about the spectrum of size. And it's not immediately obvious, but the designer, Scott Citron, wanted all kinds of precision here to make the reader's experience just right. So over the last 2 decades, there have been an explosion of good enough publishing. We've all experienced it, right? Through HTML and WordPress and Drupal, and now social media sites such as LinkedIn and Facebook and Canva and Adobe Spark tools. And great strides are being made to allow virtually anyone to create a quality experience, one that can be viewed on a huge array of devices, from mobile to desktop, or even for print. Unfortunately, there have been far fewer strides made in the world of precision placement. It was just over 25 years ago when the release of Acrobat and the PDF format truly revolutionized the design and publishing industry. Right? Most people don't realize or don't remember that the Flash web format also started around the same time. And while it certainly had its failings, it was in many ways a brilliant attempt at creating precision placement for the web. 20 years ago, Adobe InDesign was a huge improvement over the previous technology for building precision placement documents. Subsequent versions added some pretty cool features as well to the tool. But in the last decade, there's been very little innovation to help precision placement publishers. In fact, in some ways, in my opinion, the experience has gotten worse, not better. See, these radical changes in good enough publishing have led to a rise in expectations. So viewers, readers have become increasingly sophisticated, design aware, and most importantly, they expect interactivity. It's like those videos you've all seen of toddlers being shown a print magazine and they're trying to pinch and zoom the photographs, right? Precision publishers have really had to scramble to keep up, and it has not been pretty. Like this quote, this was posted on our forum about a month ago. I've got the GIF that I want to use, but it's not animated when I export a PDF. What am I supposed to do? So, what am I supposed to tell this woman? Now, I remember when I was around, I remember when PDF was designed. This is the original Camelot Doc. Our vision is to capture documents from any application, send versions of these documents anywhere, and view and print documents on any device. And Warnock and Geschke and their team built PDF from its foundation as a packet technology, promising that PDF could be a container for anything. But have you tried to make a PDF for on-screen use these days? It is a study in frustration. Buttons work on desktop, but not on tablets. Animations are pretty much out of the question. Videos are clunky and often require Flash over a decade after its death knell. It's ridiculous. Even something as simple as a slideshow is painful. So this has been hard for designers, right? Who obviously care about precision publishing. On the one hand, they love PDF for the consistency, the reliability, the ubiquity of the experience. But most designers have now grown up relying on PDF. But on the other hand, they need the creativity, the flexibility, the interactivity of HTML. And here's the thing. Over the past decade, as the PDF experience has become more frustrating and less reliable, HTML has become increasingly reliable. It's consistent, it's accessible, it's beautiful, it's engaging, and of course, it's nearly ubiquitous. So, good enough has almost caught up. Today, some publishers are bypassing InDesign entirely. They're using HTML5 as a single source format, and then converting paginated HTML for display, and they're using PDF only when necessary as an intermediary format for print. In other words, PDF is being reduced to a PDL, a page description language like PostScript or PCL. Now, you know there's problems with this, right? Archiving for one. But I think the biggest problem with HTML is documents. EPUB is an attempt to package web content into a document, a compact transferable experience. And it has been a huge success for a very small percentage of creatives. Largely it's been a failure for designers, mostly because of the poor adoption and integration of the reader technology. And as you might know, the W3C is now working on PWP, which is another attempt to package web content, such as HTML, CSS, into a document, but that's probably a long way off, right? So last week at Creative Pro Week, my event, I did see some very cool technology for easily distributing HTML packages, documents. It's not ready for prime time yet, but it is getting there. So it can be very hard to create digital documents with a high level of design, but it's even harder to distribute those apps. So what designers need is obvious, right? They need PDF, but not today's PDF, relying on outdated technology and a bumbling, unreliable support for design techniques that almost every creative professional expects today. We need a new PDF, one that honors the past, but looks toward the future, a document format that is truly a container for experiences. Now remember that it's the designer's job to create an experience, whether you're viewing a billboard or a pamphlet or a novel or an actuarial table. It doesn't matter, it's still an experience. The reader is having an experience. There's a packet transmission going on. And the designer's job is to create that experience in such a way that the argument, the implications, the lesson, the expression is successful. But great experiences are rarely static. That's the difference between a document and art. Documents need to engage, they need to adapt and flow in order to meet the reader and express the idea, the feeling, the message. So remember what we're here to do. We are here to collect, filter, process, synthesize, and then share. The greater, more successful, the more rich the sharing, the more we all thrive. The truth is that we don't see the bigger picture. We don't know what we are part of, that humans, like neurons in a vastly more complex system, are moving toward. And yet we do know that it involves communication, expressing ourselves the best we can through symbols, through precise, consistent, engaging design. We are, each of us, part of a larger system, a social network, a body politic, and we can make a difference. Thank you.